This stuff is the founder's job. It is the chief executive's job. And so it's
Right.
kind of mind blowing how most businesses do not actually engage with these questions or try to develop.
Hi there, I'm Vishesh, your host. I'm a 5 time founder and CTO. I help startups ship code, launch faster with fewer people, and turn messy ideas into working systems. Check out my work at vishesh.space. In this episode, I'm joined by Alex M. H. Smith, founder of Basic Arts and author of No Bullshit Strategy. Alex is on a mission to make strategy feel intuitive and powerful, and not abstract or elite. We dive deep into the sharp, irreverent mind behind LinkedIn's most resonant strategy posts. Alex shares what founders get wrong and how you can build a business that doesn't compete but dominates. Hey, hi Alex. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I've been reading your posts for a while and I love the way you write. What made you realize that most business strategy advice is broken and take this leap and write a book? So you're also the author of No Bullshit Strategy. So what made you move in this direction?
Well, to be honest, I only wrote the book so that I could tell people that I'd written the book and charge more for my consulting advice at the time. It wasn't actually a very strategic initiative of me to do it. And so the success of the book was quite surprising.
Hmm.
But really, the issue that you see with strategy advice is, well, it's not really an issue with the advice, actually. The bigger issue is that most businesses don't think about it at all. They don't think about strategy at all. They don't have anything that we could call approaching a strategy. They're reacting reactively, tactically. They're just sort of like hustling and grinding and trying to find something that works.
Mm-hmm.
But when you actually look into not in particular my strategy advice, but any good solid business strategy advice that isn't very hard to find, you see that the principles contained within it are stuff which every business can profit from. Every business should be thinking about. They should be priority number one of any founder, this stuff. In fact, this stuff is the founder's job. It is the chief executive's job. And so it's
Right.
kind of mind blowing how most businesses do not actually engage with these questions or try to develop a clear, coherent way that they are going to win in their market. I mean, it's baffling. You can ask 99% of businesses, what is your strategy? And either they will not be able to tell you anything, or they will tell you something which actually isn't really a strategy in the first place, which is just as bad. So that is what is broken about strategy. And then as for strategy advice, what we can infer from that is that there's something really wrong about the way that strategy is packaged, articulated, or sold to people, which means that it just doesn't get much purchase in the majority of businesses. I mean, yeah, if you go to a Fortune 500 company, in their boardroom, yes, there are people talking about strategy and talking about it in a good way because they can afford to hire all of these, I don't know, MBAs and blah, 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 blah. Yes, it exists in that world. But look in all the rest of the business world, like it's a mess and people don't understand the basic principles. So that is basically what I, with my business, want to try and fix and to give an articulation of strategy, a version of strategy, which is more simple, more entertaining, more interesting for your average founder, for your average CEO who is not engaging with the concept as it's currently laid out.
Right. And so for a founder, like when do they realize or how do they realize they need outside strategic help? Because and what stage? Like at an early stage, I assume at super early stage it doesn't make sense to involve someone from outside, or do you think one should bring someone from outside as early as possible?
No, I don't think it should really be as early as possible. I think that obviously, like you could, if you were sort of doing it as early as possible in startup phase, you could argue that you would lower your risk of failure. But to be honest, I don't really think it's that important when you're first starting out. And this is simply because I work on the principle that the first version of the business, the initial hypothesis, the prototype, whatever, nine times out of 10, it's basically going to be quite stupid. And it's just something to get you into the game. But it isn't the way the business is always going to be, and it isn't the way the business is going to evolve. So, in a sense, that initial idea, that initial thing is just an experiment. And what matters is how you observe how the business that you put out there into the market, you observe how the market responds to it, and where it gets traction, where it doesn't get traction, etc. You learn from that. And then when you really start applying strategy is in what we might call the version 2 of the business. That is when you actually, you've got a bit of water under the bridge, you've got a bit of experience, you've got a few sort of data points to back up your thinking. And then you start to move the business into what we might call a sort of strategic, well thought through version of it. But that first version 1, that's really just to get you in the game. And honestly, like, I've seen great ideas on paper fail, and I've seen incredibly stupid, bad ideas succeed, because in that first version, you just don't know. You just have no idea how the world is going to respond. So that first version, I would probably say, you don't need to be too strategic. Just get out there and do it. Get out there and do something. That's the most important thing. You just want to be getting to a point of gathering feedback, gathering data as quickly as possible.
Right. And so, in one of the posts you wrote, if you're easy to criticize, you're easy to love. And what did you mean by that? To be strategic, do you really need to have a very different view of what you're executing?
Let's think about what it means to be unstrategic. To be unstrategic essentially means to be generic and undifferentiated, and to just walk the same path that everybody else has walked, and to ultimately be, a commodity. Now, if you walk the same path that everybody else has walked, and you just sort of do everything in a sort of best practicey type way, and you're just yet another company in a sector, the good thing about that is that because you're just doing everything generically, there's really nothing to criticize there, because every decision you're making is a safe decision and nothing's going to stand out. And to be honest, there's nothing really risky or bad about what you're doing. So in that respect, it's a very safe approach to take that approach to walk that path to mediocrity. So you're safe from criticism, but you're also actually not really going to achieve anything, because you're only going to be able to get leverage over the competition by making some differentiated choice, by choosing to do something which they didn't choose to do. So you have to have one kind of outlier, abhorrent, differentiated behavior or play in the business. You have to have something that's unusual or unique about you. And that's like the thing that's going to make the business fly. And that's what the strategy is all about. So when I say that, like, if a business is easy to criticize, it's easy to love, all that simply means is that if a business is doing something different and unusual and new, that new, unusual thing, that is going to be something which some people are going to like, and some people are going to hate. To give you an example, like, if we take a brand like LG, for instance, the TVs, phones, and whatever. Now, I could be being unfair on LG here, but LG, like, I don't really know anything about them. They seem to just be completely generic. I can't tell you anything weird or interesting about LG. So essentially, there's nothing there to criticize. I can't tell you anything bad about LG, but there's also nothing to love. Like, LG, you can't be like a fan of LG, because it's just kind of like I don't know. I don't even have an opinion on it. It's just a company. Whereas then, if we flip that over to, for sake of argument, like, I don't know, Apple being a competitor of LG's, Apple have fans and they have haters. So people hate Apple as well, of course, because Apple has got unusual standout qualities, because they're a much more strategically or if we take, I don't know, like, Ryanair is an airline in Europe, the main low cost airline in Europe, who have a very, very aggressive a very, very aggressive approach to lowering the fees on their flights. And this means that they do a lot of things that a lot of people don't like, but equally a lot of people do like it, because they like the cost cutting that these things that they do bring. So you've always got to be taking some sort of risky, spiky, charismatic decision, which is going to be the thing that fundamentally defines your strategy. And yes, it is an option which many businesses take to actually take no risks and to do nothing interesting and to do nothing new. You
Right.
can do that and you can probably survive doing that. But that's not strategy. Yeah, that's why that was the meaning of the quote.
And so, is there like a framework you would recommend to people who are starting out? Like, you know, something that will help them identify how to be different, or, have that hate or love.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're first starting out, like I said before, that version two of the company, when you're really getting into the proper strategy work, when you're doing
Right.
that, you're obviously looking at the way that the business has been performing in the market so far. So that's a little bit different because there you have some evidence and data to play with. When you're first starting out, what you really, you don't have any of that. But what you really need to do is you still need to have a sort of a strategic hypothesis. And the way that I recommend you do that is start out by writing a strategy document which lays out your argument for why this business might exist and why this business should exist and what it's trying to do. And the structure of this, it's always going to be kind of similar. Now, I've actually got a YouTube video all about writing this document, which you can look it up if you find me on YouTube, Alex M.H. Smith. But basically, you need to write an argumentative flow that sounds something like this. First of all, what category are you playing in? Every single business needs to be rooted in a pre existing, well understood category. Even if your business is very innovative, it
Right.
still needs to be interpreted by the market as being similar to something that they already understand. So, look, we could have said that, like Airbnb, for example, was a very innovative new business where you could argue that they were creating a new category. But really, Airbnb, more or less, from the outside world's perspective, it exists within the hotel category. It's an alternative to hotels. So that's essentially what it was kind of like pushing against. So you need to have a root category where you are going to kind of start your strategy from, where you can say, okay, we're a bit like a hotel brand, but we're not, but we're different. So you need to
Mhm.
start with a category because if you don't have a category, people are just not going to understand what you're doing. Then you need to basically lay out what is the status quo in this category? How does this category work now? And how do you disagree with the status quo in that category? What do you actually think is broken in this category? What is your business here to fix in this category? And understand, if you don't think that there's something broken in this category right now, then why are
Right.
you starting this business? Why does this business even exist? Obviously, being realistic, most people start businesses not to provide something new to the customer or to fix something in a category. Most people start businesses because, they just want to be their own boss or they want more money or whatever. So they're doing it for selfish reasons. And that is
Right.
fine, but that will only get you so far. That business is not going to survive. You quickly need to start asking the question of, hang on a second, why does the world need this business? And because you don't have an answer for that, then why the hell should
Right.
anyone give you their money? So you start with, like I say, what exactly is the problem in the category that the business has been designed to fix? What is the new belief that you have that this category needs? Then
Mm.
you need to write down specifically what is your business going to do practically as a result of that belief. What are you going to do differently than the competition? So this is basically your innovation. Every single new business needs to have at least one innovation within it because again, the innovation is the practical way that you are going to fix this issue that you've seen in the category. So again, I think that a new business without some form of innovation it can point to also shouldn't exist. And then the final piece is, as a result of that innovation, what new value is going to be created for the customer. And that is
Mhm.
ultimately the be all and end all of the strategy is creating new, unique value for the customer. All those other things that I said, those are just means to an end. and the end is creating new value. Because if we think about business from first principles, the way that a business is going to make money and grow is because it's giving value to the market that people want to pay money for. So
Right.
you can think about this in a very, very crude way, like it's a linear relationship. The more value you create for the market, the more value you will receive for the business. So everything that you're doing as a founder, all you're doing is you're just trying to maximize the amount of value that you put out there into the market. And the higher that you can push that, the more money you're going to get. So it's very, very simple in that way. Like, the reason that, I don't know, Apple is the biggest company in the world is simply that they found a way to generate the highest amount of value for the market of any company in the world. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, all of those steps, they are just leading to what is the unique value that this business is generating for the customer. And that is ultimately the pay dirt. And that's the purpose of the strategy.
And the value and the innovativeness also probably feeds into it, like you're saying, in terms of getting more word of mouth and pushing and getting that return that you're talking about from the market as well. But the thing that is different about, like the example you cited about Apple and LG, Apple is also able to extract a lot out of the market in terms of value back to the company because of the brand it built. And I guess you have to be strategic about the brand as well, not just the value and the innovation.
When you've got your strategy and you know what unique value you are going to put out there in the market, there are really only two ways of executing on that strategy. There's the what the business does, the product side of things, and there's
Right.
what the business says, the communication side. So clearly, when I was talking about like innovation and stuff like that, yes, the business needs to do something unique which generates that form of value that you're promising to the customer. That's that side of the equation. Then on the brand and comms and marketing side of the equation, you need to find a way to frame that offer and explain it in a way that people understand and that people find to be appealing. And that's just how and that's just how you're basically going to sell it to people. So in the short term for sales, that's obviously what you're doing. Then where brand becomes important is that eventually, just as happened with Apple and any other great strategic brand, people are going to come in and copy you. And no, no form of competitive advantage lasts forever. But if you execute so aggressively on your part of the market and the offer that you're trying to take ownership of, and you do it so clearly and with so much like passion and flair, you will start to become associated with that particular part of the market. And then even when other people come in and they offer something pretty similar to you, you're going to be in a defensible position. So a very good example of this would be something like IKEA. So like as far as I'm concerned, IKEA have completely lost their hard competitive advantage because there's other cheap furniture and there's other flat pack furniture and blah, 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 blah. So like on paper, you could say that all the innovations that IKEA had have now, not all of them, but a lot of them have basically been copied. But because IKEA did such an aggressive, clear job of owning that market space, people still just naturally think that IKEA is the place where you go for affordable design. There are loads of other options in reality, but naturally people just default to it. Again, with Apple, we can say that, back in the Steve Jobs glory days,
Right.
Apple was the only business that was making products like they were making. Now, Apple has got almost no meaningful differentiation from a bunch of other competitors. But it doesn't matter because people just intuitively think, oh, well, Apple are the brand that I go to if I want that kind of product. So it's kind of like you need to have, we could even say that like hard differentiated innovation based strategy is how you claim your part of the market, but then brand is how you keep that part of the market in the long term when people actually sort of like catch up to you. And so much of this just comes down to executing with real aggression and real flair and real sort of passion.
Right. And that probably only comes if you truly believe that you are challenging the status quo and you are doing something different.
Exactly. And so like you, yeah, if you, that whole challenging the status quo thing that I was describing, that is obviously like your argument for your strategy and what the business is going to do. So that's the sort of under the hood thing. But exactly as you say, if your business is built on a kind of contrarian, fresh thinking, alternative point of view, that's going to make interesting branding much, much more easy for you to do because your business is suddenly about something and you can actually like speak with a sense of mission and a sense of contrarianism and all of this stuff that makes a business interesting.
Right. Um, in I you also said at some in one of your posts you said you talk about getting competitors to write your strategy. Usually people advise not to focus too much on the competition. How do you get your competitors to write your strategy?
All right, yeah, so that's a good question because this is one place where like a lot of the stuff that I talk about with strategy, I think that you can find other articulations of the same idea elsewhere because it's a universal idea, nobody owns it. This is one space where maybe my thinking is a little bit different to other people's. You get a lot of advice out there which is all about don't focus on the competitors, focus on the customer, focus on what the customer needs, focus, give the customer what they want. Now, at a tactical day-to-day level, this is extremely true. Okay, from a point of view of just like your day-to-day customer satisfaction and doing a good job for them, of course you should be focusing aggressively on the customer and all the rest of it. But on a higher strategic level and finding the unlock that's going to separate you from your competitors in the market, this is a terrible approach. The customer cannot tell you this because a couple of reasons. The first reason is because just everybody knows that it makes good sense to listen to your customers and ask them what they want and blah, 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 blah. And because you and all of your competitors know that, you're all asking the same questions and you're looking in the same places, then you're all going to find the same answers. And that low hanging fruit is very likely going to have been picked. The likelihood that you go to your customers and say, tell me what keeps you up at night, tell me what you really want, blah, 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 blah. And they're going to tell you something, which is this amazing, like new, untapped area of the market. It's like zero. It's just not going to happen. They're just going to tell you a bunch of like boring platitudes, which you and all your competitors already know. So there's no leverage to be found there. You need to talk to your customers, yes, but you're not going to, just for operational best practice, but you're not going to find leverage there. So then the question becomes, where do you find leverage? And this is why I think that you actually need to focus on your competitors. Because the thing about your competitors is that they define the landscape that you're operating in. Every single thing a business does is contextual. It's context based. So this is why you actually have to pay a huge amount of attention to your competitors. You don't ignore your competitors. You've got to pay a huge amount of attention to them because what you offer is relative to what they offer. So if your competitor offers X and you come along and also offer X, the same thing, that's a pretty big deal because then you're going to commodify yourself. So how you can't ignore the fact that that your competitor's offering the same thing. You need to know that. So you need to triangulate with your competitors and you need to basically focus on how can we offer something first and foremost that is different from what our competitors want. And I actually think initially, when you're really thinking about this in a creative way, don't worry too much about whether the customer wants the thing that you're selling. Worry about whether the thing is fresh and different from the competition. And then what you can do, if you identify a new differentiated thing in the market, then ask, okay, this would be new, this would be interesting, this would genuinely be unique, but would the customers want it? What kind of benefit would this thing give to the customer? What sort of customer would be interested in this thing? And what you'll then find, which is very exciting, is that you will then essentially tap into completely fresh, unmet needs and unmet problems that your customers have, but that they were never even thinking about in the first place, because like you, they're thinking too narrowly. So let me just give you a really sort of extreme example of this. Like in recent times, a lot of people have been interested in the brand Liquid Death. So they've they're a very sort of exciting, sexy new brand who've come along, and all they've really done is they've just like put water into kind of heavy metal packaging. They put it in a can, but they weren't the first canned water. But they were the first people to give this insane branding, like the name suggests, Liquid Death. And there's a whole skull on the pack and all this kind of silly stuff. Now, let's think about this from a point of view of like talking to the customer and identifying a customer need. Was any customer on the planet asking for that product? No, because it's a completely stupid idea. And it doesn't really, like, on the face of it, you're never going to get a customer saying, "Oh, I'm really sick of Evian and Volvic and like water that looks like nice and pure and clean. I really want water that looks like it's been designed by a death metal band." Nobody's going to say that, because there was no problem that customers thought they had, which this answered. However, if we then flip it and we look at it from the point of view of, okay, let's just do something which is highly differentiated from the competition, and let's not worry about the customer for a second. What would be the opposite of Evian? Well, Evian is all about like youth and beauty and purity and cleanliness. And Liquid Death is basically the opposite of all of that. It's about sort of like grunge and irony and death and all this other kind of stuff. Now, we put the water, we say, okay, this is a differentiated proposition. It might be a stupid proposition, but damn it, we can say that it's differentiated. Then we ask, okay, would people actually want to buy this? You know what it turns out? Actually, yes, when people see it, they want it, because it turns out that obviously there's a whole new realm of sort of irony and self-expression that a lot of like sort of Gen Z millennial customers out there in the United States, they really want that. But do you see how you had to start with the idea, the differentiated idea, before you could identify demand in the market? So differentiation first, demand second, not demand first and then solution. It would be beautiful if we could find the demand and answer it, but that just isn't going to happen. So you've got to think more creatively than that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting approach. How do founders know if they've hit the right idea? So they have the differentiation, they've thought about the differentiation, and they've tested the demand. They could still commit a strategic blunder. What's the North Star when figuring out strategy? Um, what do you teach founders in terms of how to identify ideas that are bad or good, or whether they are on the right track?
Well, so now, like I said before, with that first hypothesis for the business, you just need something that is coherent and clear, makes sense on paper, and then you just see how it goes. Most of the time when I'm working with a business, obviously it's not a new startup, it's a business that's been existing for some time. And then the job becomes easier, because what you're trying to do in that scenario is you aren't looking for a completely blue sky idea. Like, hey, what if we did this? Because the business already exists, and the business is already trading, and the business already has customers, and the business is already earning money, presumably. So you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. In that scenario, what your job is essentially, it's to find out what is the unique advantage or leverage that this business has, which we can isolate and double down on. And we have to assume that every business out there that's making money is actually delivering a new form of value. But typically, the founder of the business or the people running the business, they do not know what that is. So you basically have to find the latent strategic advantage that's already hiding inside this business and double down and then double down on it. Like, there's this great Dolly Parton quote, which I think sums up all of strategy, where she says, find out who you are and do it on purpose. And this is what sort of like more mature businesses, this is how they do strategy. You do not come up with this random new idea. Hey, what if we did this? Instead, you find out where is this business currently working? And then how can we do that much more aggressively? How can we turn the volume on that up to 11 and really, really double down on this? So look, if we look at the history of so many great businesses, this is basically what they did. They figured out, it's sort of like the process of finding product market fit, really. They figured out like, who are the people out there who really seem to vibe with what we're doing? Or what are the bits of our product that really people are interested in and they catch fire with? And then you start to actually build your strategy around that. So this is how you can kind of develop a strategy that you know is likely to work well, because you're just isolating the bits of the business that are already working. Now, don't get me wrong, you are probably going to have to generate new things in order to truly own this. You might like the opportunity that you've identified from looking at the data around your business might only be doing that thing a little bit now. And your goal is to try and make it do that thing a lot. And you're probably going to have to change the branding, change the messaging. You're probably going to have to change the product or maybe add new products, stuff like that. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, company that I worked with a few years ago was this cereal bar in the UK called Eat Natural. And they were like the original kind of granola cereal bar back in the late 90s. And they were operating, obviously, as they perceived it, in this sort of healthy snack space, kind of health foods space. But over time, what happened was that more and more competitors came out, and those competitors were launching healthier and healthier products until 15, 20 years later, Eat Natural was no longer considered a healthy product. It was actually considered an unhealthy product. So they'd lost all of their leverage in the category that arguably they had invented. So we had to think about, okay, so what is actually a strategy that's going to make this business work now in 2018 or whatever year this was? And so like I said, you've got to look at the business. How is it performing now? And where does this business actually have leverage? And what we found is that, because they were still selling lots and lots of bars, but what we found is that they were not selling bars to the kind of health conscious, yoga pants, yummy mummy sort of health food audience. Who they were selling to was more like the builders and the white van men and people who were actually very, very unhealthy. They were selling to people who were buying their product not instead of another healthy bar. They were buying their product instead of a Snickers or a Mars bar. And yes, okay, the Eat Natural bar was unhealthy, but it was a lot more healthy than a Snickers or a Mars bar. So you can see that they had actually slipped down into the confectionery category completely by accident, because this is where they had leverage. They did not have leverage in the healthy category. They had leverage in the unhealthy category. They were like the unhealthy person's idea of what health food is. So you uncover that's where this business actually currently has leverage. And then you have to move the business towards that. So for a simple example with them, you think about where the product is merchandised. Instead of being merchandised on the health foods aisle of a high-end classy supermarket like a Waitrose, where they actually want to be is among the unhealthy confectionery in like a vending machine or in a gas station or something like that, which is really where the product had purchased. So do you see what I mean? You find that little nugget of how this business really works and what the business wants to be. And then you just shove the business in that direction and you start, as Dolly Parton said, you start doing it on purpose. So that is the process for real strategic development as I see it. Rarely is it about coming up with this like random new blue sky idea.
And so, in their case, did they end up also changing the messaging, or the messaging was the same and they just started selling it at a different price?
Well, it's funny that you asked that, because that's exactly what we were working on at the time. And then actually Ferrero came in and bought the whole business. So Ferrero bought the business. And so the founder was very happy, and we could say the project was a success. But then what Ferrero have done with the business since then, I don't really know because I wasn't involved. And to be honest, from what I can see from the outside, I don't think that they've done a very good job because the brand, I think, this might not be true. I haven't looked at the numbers, but just visually, I think the brand has declined since then.
Mm.
Ferrero had their own strategic agenda for what to do with this brand. But from my point of view of the project and from the founder's point of view, we did what we needed to do.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I know you have hard stops, so I'm gonna also talk a little bit about a topic that I am pretty interested in as well: content-led growth. You've built a 100K plus following. Do you post daily?
Yeah,
Was
weekdays. Yeah.
it and was this strategic from day one as you were building this consulting practice?
No, no, no. For many years, I had no audience at all, and I wasn't thinking about it in that way.
Right.
I was just sort of bouncing from random lead to random lead, as a lot of people do. And then
Hmm.
one day I was just like, well, this is stupid. I have no top of funnel. I need some way for people to hear about me.
Right.
And I wasn't very imaginative. And I thought, all right, well, look, LinkedIn it is. I better just start posting on LinkedIn. So I started posting on LinkedIn, and and it was like, it was just pretty unremarkable, just like everyone else is. And I was getting up to the point where maybe I could get like 15 or 20 likes for a post. And honestly, like at that stage, so maybe only having 1 or 2 thousand connections and getting 15 likes for a post, that is enough for a consultancy type business anyway. That is enough to actually make a meaningful change to the business. So that was already good for the business. It wasn't like anything crazy, but you don't need to be like huge for this to actually be helpful. I think around 15, 20 likes kind of place is decent. It's already paying dividends then. And what I did was I kept on analyzing my posts and then doubling down on what worked and trying to learn, okay, well, what do people really like? This is something I actually need to do now, by the way. I haven't done this exercise for a while. I need to go back and just sort of review today so that I can do the same thing. So I was using like analytics tool, and I was looking at all my posts, and I was like, okay, people like this post, they don't like this post, keep on evolving it. Until then eventually I sort of like struck on the right formula. And to tell the truth, I had one post that went mega viral, and you can't rely on that, which is the sad truth. You can't rely on that. I had one post that went
Right.
mega viral. It got me about 25,000 followers from this one post. And I don't think even
Wow.
now that's possible on LinkedIn anymore because they changed the algorithm and it's crap and they try and suppress virality. So I don't even know if you can actually do that on LinkedIn in 2025.
Right.
But that obviously then got the ball rolling, and then after that it became much, much easier. And obviously I had to like figure out like, what do people want me to post about, what do people want me to hear about, and all that no bullshit strategy stuff, and kind of like democratizing strategy and making it clear and simple. This is what people wanted from me. But when I first started posting, that wasn't my thinking. I didn't go in thinking this is what I'm going to do. It was like I said to you before, you have to find out who you are and do it on purpose. You have to discover what works and double and triple down on it. So that's what I did with the content.
Right. The writing quality, though, like I mean, I read a lot of LinkedIn posts. You're one of the best writers in terms of, especially the carousel posts you do. You've nailed the whole open a loop and, the hourglass approach, and you almost always deliver that value. How did you nail the writing style? Were there things that helped you that others can use?
So yeah, there were. I mean, unfortunately, a big part of it is that like I've always been a very, very fast writer, so I could produce the content at scale very, very, very rapidly. The whole AI thing is very, very annoying because that has like removed some of my competitive advantage in that space, because obviously now people can use AI to write very, very quickly. But I always just like enjoyed writing, and I think that if you don't actually like doing it, then it's hard to imagine you succeeding at it. So that's one important thing to point out. But then let me see, what did I do? You have to think about everything that you write as a negotiation between you and the audience. originally I was writing what I wanted to write and what interested me. And that doesn't really work. That's kind of like selfish. That's only half the equation. You do have to sell out a bit, if you understand what I mean. And you have to, sometimes there are things that you want to write about and people don't want to read about. And so you just like, so I just don't write them. You have to meet the audience halfway and you have to find that negotiation between what you're writing and what they want to read. A big part of that is obviously taking hooks seriously. And I know that's not an original comment at all, but originally I spent a long time being very resistant to hooks and thinking that they're clickbaity and icky. But then a friend of mine, he made the very good point. He was like, with a hook, you're actually not, it's not icky. You are doing people a service because you're basically saying to people, hey, here's why you should read this thing. Here's what you're going to get from it. So you're actually being helpful if you write a good hook. You're not being manipulative as long as the post follows through on the promise of the hook. So that's very obvious. You've got to get that right. And so a lot of people just don't write good hooks, so people don't read the rest of the post. And then another thing that I thought a lot about, which you don't hear a lot of people talking about, is that like you need the writing to be very easy on the eye. And I'm talking about the layout of the text. It needs to be very it needs to sort of slip down in a very like a cold beer kind of thing. It needs to be very, very easy to read. I read this thing in an old advertising copywriting book that talked about good writing is easier to read than it is to skip because it's actually been laid out in a way where, sometimes you might be walking along and you'll see an ad or something and you didn't want to read it, but you did just read it because the way that it's been laid out, you sort of like it sort of slipped in there without you even trying to, right? So I think a lot about like how the structure of my paragraphs look on the page. And like one page will be like one line, then two bullet points, and then one word. And then you turn the page, and the next page is just one word. And then you turn the page again, and it's just like a paragraph. So you have this rhythmic kind of like ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom feel, regardless of what you're actually saying, you're laying out the text in a way that is just easy for the person reading it to consume. Versus when people just like put down like a massive paragraph and immediately, and it might be an amazing paragraph, and it's just like, oh, I'm not going to read that, So, or doing things like using the wrong font choice, or it's just ugly, or it's busy, or like all of those things stop what you're writing being easy to read. So you've got to get over that first hurdle. Just make it so it's easy on the eye. And then after that, it's much easier.
Yeah, so that's a really good tip. Are you still a one person shop, or you've now grown and pushed yourself into becoming a more than a solopreneur? And what are some of the systems, habits, or tools you have that have helped you scale your impact, keeping the team lean?
Yeah, good question. So I am not a one man business anymore. I mean, I'm the only person who does the strategy work with clients. So in that respect, it's still a sort of one man business. But actually running my business, obviously now I need kind of like help. So I have an assistant and I'm working with a guy who's sort of responsible for the kind of machine of the business, like the funnel and the email automations and Zapier and all that stuff. And then I've also got a couple of guys helping me with sales calls, and I've got a video editor and a little bit of design help, this type of stuff. Because obviously most of my business is sort of like really a media business. So that's how I think about it. So obviously I need the media resources. In terms of like tips on how to kind of scale it, if you're looking at it from the point of view of being a sort of like a consultant type business model and how you kind of scale that, this is very obvious stuff, but if you're not, but maybe to some people it isn't obvious. You need to generate a very basic funnel. You need to know what your top of funnel is. In my case, it's primarily LinkedIn. You need to then drive people to a lead magnet, which puts them on a newsletter. You capture the data, and then you serve higher value on that newsletter, and then you try and push that through to contacting you for the sales process. You need to have this basic machine set up. Set up 100%. And it's crazy to me. I mean, it's just so obvious, but like, it's crazy to me how many businesses they do not have a clear idea of what their top of funnel is and how people find them in the first place. Everything else is gonna collapse if you haven't figured that out. You have to be getting traffic from somewhere in a reliable, at scale manner. And because when you have that traffic, then you can decide what you're going to do with it and how you're going to chop it up and how you're going to pull it through to a point where it becomes where it becomes a converted sale. Another general tip that I think is really important is you need to spend exponentially more time in your business on marketing than on delivery. You see a lot of businesses, especially more sort of consultancy type businesses, where they might, let's say, spend 4.5 days a week servicing their clients and half a day a week on admin and maybe nothing on marketing. This is all wrong. You've got to, if you think of it from a point of view of time and resources, you should be spending approximately 4 times more time and 4 times more resources on marketing than you should be spending on delivery. Delivery should be one of the smallest energy expenditure points of your business, because delivery, as far as possible, should be systematized and it should be rapid and it should be a sort of fairly repeatable process. So like in my case, like I have roughly 1 day a week that I will work on client stuff. And that's 4 days a week where all I'm doing is business development of one form or another, like marketing, content generation, innovation, new product development, whatever. So like it really has to be that higher volume of time that you're spending, because you can't have marketing and innovation be an afterthought, which I think it's almost like a sort of optional extra for a lot of businesses. Or you hear that funny thing where like, oh, the first budget to get cut when things are tough is marketing or whatever. And I'm like, no. The first budget to get cut is like helping the client. I mean, there shouldn't really be much budget associated to that at all in the first place. So I just think that people just don't commit enough to the demand generation side of their business.
Yeah, makes sense. I think a lot of people do push it down. Final question. I know we are almost out of time. If every founder had to tattoo one strategy word on their arm, what would you tell them? What should be?
Back to one strategy. Yes, hang on. This is a good one. Let me get a good answer. If you're going to boil it down to one word and not one sentence, the word that springs to mind is give. Because strategy is about finding the way that you can just give the most to people. And like I said before, the more you give, the more you're going to get. It's a very, very simple binary equation. The more you give as a business, the more you are going to get. And so if you aren't spending all day, every day thinking about how can I give more, how can I give more, how can I give more, and instead all you're thinking is how can I take more, how can I take more, how can I extract more here, there comes a time for extraction, but ultimately, like, it's giving, which is going to be the main thing that determines the success of the business. You always need to bring your mind back to it.
Right. Well, I don't have a tattoo, but if I had to get one, I would definitely get that. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. It was a pleasure talking to you. Where can people follow you? I'm sure the book is available on most platforms, but do you want to talk a little bit about where can people reach you and where can people follow you?
Yeah, so the book is available on most platforms. No bullshit strategy, Audible and Kindle and all that stuff. Then I you can find my best sort of social media channels: Alex MH Smith on LinkedIn, Alex MH Smith on YouTube. I've just started on YouTube, so I'm trying to like get that going. And then, of course, my newsletter, which you can subscribe to. If you just go to my website, basicarts.org, you'll find it there. And that's obviously the sort of the highest quality channel.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Alex, again, thanks for joining. It was a fun chat, and don't hang up after the recording
No,
stops.
don't worry. Thanks a lot.
All right, take care. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. See you in the next episode.